event, not first meeting for the working group. My name is Rob Pensino. I'm the co-chair along with Emily Thompson from the New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action for this working group. And we wanted to kick this off with something that I think is extraordinarily important. I think everyone here will agree. Certainly you're here for a reason. And that is the issue of food, not just not just from a global perspective, but from a Granite State perspective. And we're lucky to have with us this afternoon Gene Jonas, who is going to be giving us his talk on the true cost of food. And without any further ado, unless anyone has any other comments that they'd like to make, I think we should get started on that. So Gene, when you're ready, if you want to share your screen and take us from there.
Okay. Slideshow. Okay. Can people see this?
Yes. Yes, yep. You're good to go.
All right, that was the big part. So thanks for being here today, and thanks for letting me speak. This is my 9th presentation actually on this talk I put together. I put it together starting last fall. My name is Gene Jonas, and I want to talk to you today about the true cost of food. My hope in presenting this info today is that you will come away with the understanding that this so-called cheap food we all buy at the grocery store, and for the most part, which comes from our industrial ag system, isn't so cheap after all the hidden costs associated with the system more intensively analyzed. Also, I hope you will come to appreciate the slightly higher prices you might pay for local, fresh, and preferably organically grown agricultural products in our area. First, a little bit of information about myself and how I got into farming. These are some pics taken at our farm, except for the river there. That's the Sauhegan River, which is close to our farm. I started farming in 2009 when my wife, Marilyn, and I sold our home in Mass, and we moved to Wilton, New Hampshire. We've been growing organic produce to the standards, the national standards, for 14 years. The name of our farm is Hungry Bear Farm, and we live in Wilton, but the main farm is in Mason, New Hampshire, which actually borders Massachusetts. We grow a wide variety of produce, and nowadays mainly sell through our CSA. We do a little bit of wholesaling, but not too much. We don't use any persistent synthetic toxins, and instead employ the use of cover crops, compost, manure, beneficial insects, crop rotation, and selective tillage. This is the best way I know how to grow produce. So why is the food me and other local farmers sell more expensive than the food you might buy at the grocery store? I began asking this question years ago when I was doing the Peterborough Farmers Market. I had a fellow vendor come up to me one day. I have to remember this. I can't not forget it because it was kind of startling. She said something like, "I don't see how anyone can afford to buy organic food. It's just too damn expensive." I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that was the message. On the other hand, I had a customer of mine when we were doing the Hancock Market on Saturdays years ago. He used to talk to me quite a bit when he was buying our food, and he used to say, "I can pay you now, or I can pay the doctor later." So, two different ideas there about local, organic, fresh produce. So I began to question whether or not the store-bought food is really that much cheaper. Then a few years back, I began to see articles and books being written on what is now known as true cost accounting, specifically as it applies to the food system. So what is true cost accounting? Here's one definition. I'll let you read it. I'll be silent for a second while you read it. So true cost accounting of food looks at the entire system of not only what it takes to produce, process, aggregate, store, and transport food, but the effects these systems have on our society and our world as a whole, and also our health. True cost accounting for our industrial food system is applied in order to put an economic value on the system in order to take direct action at creating a more fair and saner food system for us all. Today's call for true cost accounting is a direct result of the rising economic cost of the negative ecological and social impacts of industrial agriculture, which predominate our agricultural systems today. Back in 2021, the Rockefeller Foundation did a report on our food system here in the US using true cost accounting, and this is what they found. You can read it. I hate to talk over people while they read things because I always find that annoying. So I'll give you a second to read it. So arguably the biggest barrier to making food and farming more sustainable is the distorted economic system, which takes in account of the direct costs of production, such as land, feed, seeds, labor, and farming equipment, but fails to include the many externalized costs, including pollution, biodiversity loss, social, cultural, and welfare impacts. This system is a situation where food produced intensively appears to be cheaper to consumers and more profitable producers than food produced in more sustainable ways. However, the external costs of this system are ultimately paid for by consumers, either individually or as part of society, even though they might not realize this. Currently, we're paying 3 times for the food we eat. First, in agricultural subsidy payments. These are tax dollars paid by you and me, which largely promote intensive crop production. Secondly, we pay for the food at its retail value when we buy it at the store. Finally, we pay for it a third time to cover the costs of healthcare, poverty, and environmental degradation. So hopefully I will be able to play this video for you to sum up what I just tried to get across.
When we buy food, we pay for much more than just the fruit on the tree. Costs for labor, transportation, processing, and production all go into that price. But that number is just a slice of the true cost of food. Consider everything we don't pay for at the checkout line. Impacts on the environment, underpaid labor, benefits for farm workers, the cost of diet-related disease. Those things add up. Altogether, the true cost of food is estimated to be at least 3 times what we currently pay. But don't think we're getting a good deal here. We're actually getting squeezed. Society pays that balance, not out of our pockets, but through other means, like rising healthcare costs, effects of climate change, and food workers who are often underpaid and undervalued. This is the true cost of food, and often marginalized communities pay the biggest share. Here's some good news. Understanding these additional costs can help us make better decisions, not just about what we grow and eat, but about the systems and policies that affect what ends up on our plate every single day.
It's always nice when that video plays. I had a couple times when it didn't. So let's slide here. There we go. The big happy fella. According to the Rockefeller report, the costs related to human health were by far the greatest driver of unaccounted for costs, roughly at 1.1 trillion. That figure alone nearly doubles the cost of our food system. The majority of these costs, over 600 billion, are attributable to healthcare costs related to diet-related diseases like hypertension, cancer, and diabetes. At present, approximately 1/3 of the US population is overweight and another third are obese. Conservative cost estimates for this epidemic range between 2 and 300 billion per year. Diabetes currently costs the economy well over 200 billion a year and is expected to rise to between 5 and 700 billion a year should current trends continue. By 2030, at current rates, 2/3 of US citizens will be clinically obese, and 1 in 3 newborns will grow up to be diabetic, or 1 in 2 if African American or Latino. The United States has the highest cost of healthcare in the world as a percentage of our gross national product, and also the cheapest food. So why are people in this country and also much of the rest of the world so unhealthy? Could it be the kinds of foods that we're eating? Ultra-processed foods are a relatively new invention. What is ultra-processed food exactly? Well, it's got a long scientific definition, but I read a book, this actually was last fall I read it. It's called Ultra-Processed People. And they say their definition is if it's wrapped in plastic and has at least one ingredient that you wouldn't usually find in a standard kitchen, it's UPF. Ultra-processed foods, or UPF, is ubiquitous in the foods we typically buy and consume. So typically, they contain little, if any, whole food and are made from cheap, chemically altered ingredients, including modified starches, sugars, oils, and fats. According to the book, these products are specifically engineered to behave as addictive substances, driving excess consumption. They are now linked to the leading cause of death globally and the #1 cause of environmental destruction. Yet almost all of our staple foods are ultra-processed. UPF is our food culture, and for many people, it's the only available and affordable food. In the US, 60 to 80% of the calories of the typical American diet come from UPF. These newfangled chemical concoctions called emulsifiers, flavorings, colorings, etc., they go largely unregulated here in the US. The FDA is underfunded, understaffed, and oftentimes at the mercy of the companies that create them. This results in about 10,000 or so food additives to be allowed into our food system, as many of them are generally regarded as safe. The FDA relies on data from the companies themselves in order to determine whether or not the chemicals they are introducing are safe for human consumption. That is, if the company even bothers to submit a request at all. So, no conflict of interest, right? So what kinds of health issues have these chemicals been found to cause by independent researchers? Anxiety, depression, cancers, microbiome destruction, inflammatory issues, immune system problems, and the list goes on. As more of the world adopts this way of eating, even in countries like China, obesity rates rose 800% from 1980 to 2015. Then there's the issue of the agrochemicals themselves. An article I found from last November mentions how baby food is often contaminated with toxic pesticides. This article states nearly 40% of conventional baby food products analyzed in a new US study were found to contain toxic pesticides, while none of the organic products sampled in the survey contained the chemicals. There's a whole host of these chemicals that I'm talking about, much of which if I tried to pronounce them, I'd probably get the pronunciation wrong. But suffice to say that they cause all kinds of problems, including immune system problems. They disrupt hormones. They harm fetal development. Unlike pharmaceuticals, which undergo strict scrutiny under FDA guidelines before reaching the marketplace, most agricultural chemicals are not required to be tested for health implications and side effects before use, meaning that they are essentially uncontrolled medicine. Like I already said, if they are tested, then the FDA often relies on the company making those products to supply the test results they obtain from testing their own products. So to me, this is like the fox watching the hen house. Everyone's probably heard of Roundup by now. It was patented by Monsanto. Well, actually, let me back up. The active ingredient in Roundup is known as glyphosate. It was patented by Monsanto and originally developed as a chemical. It was going to be used to clean out industrial boiler pipes as it binds with minerals well. Roundup holds or makes unavailable the vital nutrients of any living thing it touches. For plants, it works by disrupting certain enzyme activity that they need for growth. Glyphosate Roundup is the most widely used pesticide in the world, with approximately 300 million pounds applied annually in the US. Unfortunately, many of the foods we eat have trace amounts of glyphosate in them, especially products containing grain crops like wheat and oats. On the bright side, many recent lawsuits have been successfully won against Monsanto, which got bought out by Bayer a few years back, by the plaintiffs that argued and successfully argued that it caused their cancers. Glyphosate exposure has also been reported to disrupt our gut health in numerous ways. Studies dating as far back as 2014 found a 99% correlation between glyphosate usage amounts and the rising rates of children with autism. According to the National Institute for Health, it is unequivocal that exposure to glyphosate produces important alterations in the structure and function of the nervous system of humans, rodents, fish, and invertebrates. So this is not as benign as it sounds. This is a deadly chemical. So you might have heard the term PFAS. It's a chemical, a man-made chemical. It stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're often known as forever chemicals, called so because they do not break down in the environment and pretty much last forever. They're so ubiquitous that they are now found in the blood of 97% of US residents. There's more than 12,000 man-made PFAS chemicals used by a variety of industries like electronics, oil and gas, fracking, paints, pesticides. They're also in cosmetics, sports clothing, dental floss, food packaging, floor wax, carpeting. You get the point, they're everywhere. Originally developed by 3M Corporation and then later taken up over by DuPont mainly. They've been around since the 1940s, actually. These chemicals have been proven to cause all kinds of health problems, cancers, immune deficiencies, thyroid problems, birth defects, endocrine disruption, liver damage, disrupted fetal development, and more. According to an article from civil-eats.com, I don't know if you guys know about that website, civil-eats.com. If you don't, I highly encourage you to check it out. They have awesome reporting. Scientists in multiple labs found dangerous levels of PFAS in commonly used pesticides. EPA tests have confirmed some PFAS are leaching from plastic containers into the pesticides. The article also reported that two other sources of PFAS in pesticides, inert ingredients added to help disperse the chemicals in the pesticides themselves, could lead to higher levels of contamination, soil, water, and food. Maine, the first state to try to restrict PFAS and pesticides, is wrestling with how to identify and regulate these emerging sources. So every year, farmers apply about 1 billion pounds of pesticides to nearly 900 million acres, touching soil, water, and food. Since so few pesticides have been tested, it's impossible to say how many might be contaminated with PFAS, but even a tiny percentage would be significant, according to experts. It's been known for many decades that PFAS in the environment, PFAS buildup in the environment can be absorbed by plants and livestock through soil, water, and air and move on to contaminate food. The Pentagon might be the leading reason why these chemicals have yet to be banned. They claim that losing access to PFAS due to overly broad regulations or severe market contractions would greatly impact national security and the DoD's ability to fulfill its mission. All right, here's my first question to y'all. What do you think this is a picture of?
Cyanobacteria
An
bloom?
algae bloom.
Yeah, an algae bloom coast of somewhere.
Yep, yep. This is actually a picture of probably a satellite photo. There's many online. I actually found many. I picked this one because it had pretty colors. This is the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, where the Mississippi River empties out into the Gulf in Louisiana. This area in the Gulf is pretty much devoid of oxygen and can hold little, if any, life. It can be thousands of square miles in size, depending on the year. There are over 500 such dead zones worldwide. Amazing. When I read that, I was like, whoa, I don't think they're all this size, hopefully not. Past studies indicate that the meat industry, particularly Tyson, Cargill, Smithfield, and other industry giants are the biggest causes of this particular pollution. So who's responsible for cleaning this up? That's my second question. This is the answer that I get every single talk. Silence, crickets.
Federal government, right?
Well,
Eat less beef, no
this
beef.
is who should be responsible and who is responsible are two different questions. This is a great example of what I call, and what true cost accounting calls, a negative externality on the system. How do you put a price on this? You know, true cost accounting tries to. I mean, these people are allowed to get away with polluting like this for corporate profits. Right? This affects us all in some way, and especially the people who live down there. Okay, so according to an article, again from Civil Eats that just came out not too long ago, the EPA recently reported that more than half of the country's rivers and streams are in poor condition due to nitrogen and phosphorus pollution from agriculture, which later contributes to dead zones like this one. Much of that pollution flows off farm fields, but the EPA's data also shows that facilities that slaughter animals and process meat are leading industrial sources of phosphorus pollution as well as nitrogen. Drinking water with high levels of nitrates in them may increase the risk of cancer, especially in babies. Nitrates form when nitrogen from fertilizer and manure combined with oxygen. Many Midwestern states are now taking a closer look at this situation. It's worsening. Commercial nitrogen fertilizer and nitrogen-rich livestock and poultry manure are the leading sources of nitrate contamination that is increasing in the Midwest region's surface and groundwater, according to state environmental and agricultural agencies. According to many studies, as much as 70% of the nitrogen farmers applied to the farmland leaked off fields and drained as toxic nitrates into the region's waters. If I was a chemical farmer and I was spending that much money on nitrogen fertilizer and 70% of it was basically being washed away, I'd be a little upset. Okay, factory farming, sometimes known as confined animal feeding operation, CAFO. This is industrial animal agriculture on a massive scale. There's thousands and thousands of animals are confined for days and days in large, in small spaces, and they're fed primarily a grain-based diet. Oftentimes, about 40% of all the corn and soy we grow in this country are grown to feed confined animals. And when it comes to corn, it's going to produce ethanol. In the US, 99% of animals farmed for meat are raised in factory farms. So just about all the meat you can buy at the grocery store, it doesn't say USDA organic on it, comes from an animal that suffered in a CAFO. Externalities of CAFOs include low animal welfare standards, greenhouse gas emissions, the environmental impacts of feeding grain, air and water pollution that are detrimental to human health, and negative social and economic impacts for those working in CAFOs and for people living in nearby local communities. These environments are also fertile breeding grounds for the emergence of new influenza pandemics and other dangerous diseases. Just a couple of other statistics to throw at you. There's over 24,000 confined animal feeding operations in this country alone. The state of Iowa has over 4,000 by itself. 1.7 billion animals are raised in US CAFOs each year. So what you're seeing here is an aerial view of a confined animal feeding operation, and particularly the pretty, what is that? Purple, magenta, whatever color that is, maroon. These are the open air cesspools where the animal feces and urine are kept. And about 160 different toxic gases are released by these waste lagoons, including hydrogen sulfide, methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide. These gases are fatal if you inhale them. Most manure lagoons are lined in clay, which can leak over time, allowing the waste to seep into surrounding water bodies. To give you an idea how much CAFO waste we're talking about, the amount of animal waste kept in these open air cesspools is approximately 13 times the amount of waste produced by the roughly 330 million Americans pooping and peeing each year. So what you're seeing here is, okay, so let me back up for a second. Does anyone know how these lagoons get drained when they get full? Does anyone know what really happens? Most people don't know, but I do. Because I studied this, put it in my presentation. What they do is create a temporary aerial spraying system where they pump these lagoons out through the system and basically aerials atomize the particles into the surrounding communities. It's legal. So yeah, there's another negative externality of the system, especially to the people who live in the nearby community. They're often located, these factory farms, in rural, poor communities. People have little say in what takes place. So it's the reality here. So here is a slide. I couldn't find a slide to show what I was just mentioning of the atomization of these, well, let's call it what it is, shit, and urine into the surrounding atmosphere. So here is a picture of solid CAFO waste being applied to a farmer's field. While we're talking about these poor animals living under horrific conditions and being fed a diet that they wouldn't naturally eat, I should mention the rampant overuse of antibiotics these animals receive. The same drugs are used in both human and animal medicine. Industrial animal agriculture accounts for about 80% of antibiotics sold in the USA. Bacteria in the animal production system can become resistant. Those bacteria leave the farm and cause infections in people. Resistant infections are difficult to treat and expensive. Antimicrobial resistance is worsening. Humanity is running out of treatment options. Existing approaches to solving the antibiotic resistance problem are not likely to work, and there are no plans to evaluate them in any meaningful way. What you're seeing here is more water pollution, but let's talk about water usage. Agriculture accounts for about 70% of global freshwater use. In California, it's 80%. Yet, while more than 1 million Californians don't have access to safe drinking water, it takes over a gallon of water to produce just one almond, which California has many almond groves and produces a ton of different almonds. This benefits the agribusinesses, but not the people working out there or the parts of California's Central Valley, where around 1/3 of our nation's produce is grown, has in recent years experienced areas where the ground level sinks up to 1 foot per year due to the increased pumping of groundwater from aquifers below. Climate chaos has contributed to this, as less snowpack exists each season in the Sierra Mountain range. The result of this is less water available to the region during the melting season. Nobody's really sure how much water is left in these underground aquifers, and these groundwater is subject to almost no federal oversight, but rather often to weak local regulations. Speaking of water, a new study just came out probably a couple months ago. I saw it revealed that there's around 240,000 plastic particles in the average liter of bottled water. 90% of the plastics were found to be nanoplastics, pieces smaller than a micrometer that researchers say could be more toxic than microplastics, since their size enables them to infiltrate more parts of the body. So I drink water from home. I take my water. I get my water from our well here at home. I don't buy any more water in plastic containers. So in the Midwest, soil erosion is a big issue. How much soil is actually lost? The Iowa state average is 5.7 tons per acre per year. That is more than 1 pound of soil lost for each pound of corn produced. That's kind of staggering. Policies that do little to incentivize the use of cover crops are a major cause of farmers leaving soil bare and exposed during the non-growing season, and therefore more likely to experience erosion. I don't know if you guys know about this author, David Montgomery. He writes books with his wife. He wrote a book called Dirt, The Erosion of Civilizations, and it speaks volumes about the civilizations that destroy their soils, destroying themselves eventually. Industrial agriculture is a significant contributor of greenhouse gases. I've seen estimates anywhere from 15 to over 50%, depending on the source. I read a book a few years back. It's called The Great Climate Robbery. It's put out by an international organization called GRAIN. In it, they claim that between 44 and 57% of all greenhouse gases come from the global food system. How many of you know that a large percentage of fracked gas goes into making nitrogen fertilizer for industrial agriculture? Okay, so maybe I taught you something else too. Check out a company called Yara, Y-A-R-A, in Norway. Okay, nobody knows this stuff. I mean, some people know it, but not many. Recent studies indicate that the increased use of nitrogen-based fertilizers over the last 50 years have increased the rates of nitrous oxide emissions exponentially as compared with the rate of use of other fertilizers. What this means is a large rise in atmospheric nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas 300 times more potent than CO2. Agriculture and food waste are the biggest contributors of methane as well. Methane's global warming potential is estimated to be 25 to 35 times greater than CO2, and methane concentration in the atmosphere has been increasing rapidly in the last couple of decades. We waste a lot of food in this country. In the US, the average family of four spends about $1,500 each year on food that goes uneaten. It's been estimated we waste about 35% of our food in this country. This is after all the energy associated with food production, growing, harvesting, washing, storing, processing, packaging, and transportation have gone into making it. Most of the food waste occurs in households, restaurants, and grocery stores. According to the US Food and Drug Administration, wasted food is the single largest category of material that ends up in municipal landfills, which just adds to the methane gas problem. Here's another interesting statistic for you. All the turkey that gets thrown out over Thanksgiving produces as much greenhouse gas emissions as 800,000 automobile trips from New York to San Francisco. I don't know who figured that one out, but then there's the issue of food insecurity, or what used to be known simply as hunger. California's Silicon Valley is one of the wealthiest places in the US, yet 1 in 4 people and 1 in 3 children are at risk of hunger in the region. Each year, hunger costs the nation over $170 billion. Roughly 11% of US residents in 2019, before COVID hit, were food insecure. As the inequality of the wealth gap increases, so does food insecurity. As a little aside, I read an article a few weeks back, and the title says it all. World's 5 richest men have added 14 million to their wealth every hour since 2020. Elon Musk. If I was Elon Musk for 15 minutes, I'd have 3.5 million bucks in my pocket. Think about it. Every hour since 2020. You don't think wealth inequality is a problem? I do. Another recent article from another good website called truthout.org on hunger said that 2023 was a hard year, especially for the elderly. Between inflation, corporate price gouging, reformed supplemental nutrition assistance work requirements, backlogs for aid, and expiring pandemic assistance programs, the country has seen a marked increase of food insecurity. 28 million people were experiencing hunger this past fall in 2023, a significant portion of which are over the age of 65. So here's a little personal story. We sell mostly through our CSA, like I've been saying. But in recent years, there's been a program developed, and I helped kick it off and then handed it to New Hampshire Food Alliance, which ran with it. It's basically a program whereby New Hampshire Food Bank has money and they can give it out to pantries for the specific purpose of buying food from local farmers. So it's a win-win for the local people. They get local fresh food, and the farmers get a little extra income. So I sell to this place in Milford, New Hampshire, town over where we live. And the woman I deal with was telling me, as I was selling to her last year, 2023, that there was a marked increase in need from the previous years. So this food insecurity issue becoming more acute, shall we say. 30 million school meals are served each day to our kids in this country. School kids get a large percentage of their weekly calories from these meals. Many ingredients, unfortunately, are GMO, which stands for genetically modified organisms, and they're derived from crops sprayed with Roundup, glyphosate, as a drying agent. Moms across America headed a recent study whereby 43 school lunches from 18 locations nationwide were tested for glyphosate, pesticides, drugs and hormones, heavy metals, mineral content, etc. Here's what the study found. Over 93% of these school lunches had detectable levels of glyphosate weed killer. 28 of the 44 school meals sampled contained wheat ingredients, and 100% of the wheat products tested positive for glyphosate. 29 different types of pesticides were present in 3/4 of the school lunches. 100% of the school lunch samples contained heavy metals like arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury, some at over 6,000 times higher than the EPA's maximum levels allowed in drinking water. The lab testing showed that most samples were sorely deficient in appropriate amounts of vital minerals such as sodium, potassium, iron, calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium. So this is what we're feeding our kids. Who benefits here? So then there's the issue of the food and farm workers themselves. Today, about 2 million workers labor in US fields. It's not just the public whose health is at risk. Farm workers in the US have a fatality rate 7 times higher than workers in other sectors. The EPA estimates that between 10 and 20,000 farm workers are harmed by pesticide exposure each year. Food processing agriculture workers are also amongst the most underpaid and exploited workforce in the country. When the National Labor Relations Act was passed way back in 1935, and a few years later, the Fair Labor Act was passed, which established the minimum wage. Both acts expressly exempted farm and domestic workers so that even the most basic rights, including child labor, did not apply to these workers. What you're seeing here is an image of farm workers in California back in 2017 as they worked through what was known as the Thomas Fire. It was California's largest at the time. It ultimately torched 440 square miles and cost Ventura and Santa Barbara counties billions of dollars. The smoke from these fires is often toxic, yet you can see these so-called essential workers being made to work through it. Basically, the US food system was built on slavery, and the structural racism embedded in it continues to this very day. Here's a picture of an Indonesian rainforest cut down for palm oil production. There was a study using true cost accounting several years back to determine the costs associated with this system. The results add up to 43 billion in environmental costs to society. So to put that in context, the total production value of palm oil is 50 billion. Therefore, the environmental costs of palm oil are almost equal to its total production value. If the industry had to pay for these externalities, then the cost of palm oil would almost double. It's clear that the current palm oil business model is unsustainable in the long term because of the environmental cost that society is currently subsidizing. This was believed to be a healthy oil, but it's actually become a very unhealthy environmental cost. Since 1970, more than half all the virgin rainforest in Indonesia have been destroyed for oil palm production. Between 2015 and 2018, 130,000 hectares were cleared to grow palm oil in Indonesia. That's roughly the size of Greater London. Even if you flew over it in a jetliner, it would stretch from horizon to horizon in all directions. You can't literally see it all without going into space. It was achieved with chainsaws and slash and burn techniques. The soil on the forest floor is flammable peat. The scale of the carbon released by this is hard to comprehend. On several single days, the fires in 2015 emitted more carbon dioxide than the entire US economy. Around 3/4 of palm oil is used in ultra-processed food. The companies that do this claim it in the name of efficiency. So I'd like to turn your attention now towards the topic of monopolies, concentrations of power in certain sectors of our agricultural economy. After all, it's policy that allows the industrial food system to exist in the first place. There was a report performed by Farm Action and another group called Open Markets in the last few years regarding this situation. The report concluded that the current state of concentration in the US is such that the top 4 companies control 80% of soybean processing, 73% of beef processing, 67% of pork processing. I could go on and on. Like Danone, I think Danone has like 80% of the yogurt market, for instance. It's like, you get the idea, hopefully. The report cites that the cost to the US of an industrial feed meat complex that reinforces extensive monocropping, chemical inputs, dangerous farm worker conditions, and environmental degradation for the sake of corporate profits is over $44 billion per year in soil erosion. The report calls for policies that democratize the agri-food system through antitrust enforcement, prioritizing racial equity, transforming and redirecting production subsidies, and empowering alternative and local food systems and economies. So let's talk about, I want to mention what I learned about antitrust legislation the last couple of years. And I don't know it all, but here's what I do know. It was put into place in the early 20th century when we had what's called robber barons. And, it was basically put into legislation so that companies couldn't get so big that they could fix prices and push the government around, get too powerful. It was basically put in to preserve democracy. Well, fast forward to the 1980s, under the Reagan administration, there was a fellow, I think he was a lawyer, named Robert Bork, that argued against this original intent. Bork's position was that mergers could happen, and companies should be allowed to get as big as they want, so long as prices remain affordable for consumers, which obviously wouldn't happen. This policy has dominated both Republican and Democratic parties for decades now. We see the results today, and certainly not in favor of the working class people, shall we say. You can see how much prices have risen due to inflation. A lot of that's been price gouging by corporations in the last couple of years. So, it seems that Robert Bork's theory was totally bogus. So the problem is that the laws and policies that control how industry operates are increasingly being set by corporations, not by communities and citizens. In order to fix broken systems, political power needs to be built at various levels, from community to town, city, state, and federal levels even. Democracy must be taken back from large companies and corporations if we want to see positive change in our food system. The government also needs to put its money where its mouth is. For instance, while the federal government recommends a diet of 50% fruit and vegetables, less than 1% of government support goes to supporting these commodities. So big ag does not feed the world. That is a giant myth, even though they make the claim that they do. In fact, most of the world's food comes from small scale, mostly women farmers that grow on roughly 20 to 25% of the arable land available. So you tell me if that big ag has, access to 75 or 80% of the the arable land that they grow on, and they're not feeding the world. Tell me how efficient they are. All right, final slide. Thanks for hanging in there. Hopefully I've given you some sufficient evidence about the realities of our current food system as it exists today. I've talked extensively about the many negative external costs to society and to our environment as a whole as a result of the way we predominantly supply so-called food to our nation. I don't expect you to remember all the statistics and details of what I said. I only said them at the time to try to impress upon you, the point I was trying to make. So what's the solution to all this dilemma? Well, we all have our own opinions about it. I think, I don't think we're going to change the USDA at any time, from what I understand. I think we need to build alternative systems that rival the big ag system, and that can be something quite as simple as supporting your local farms. Really, it's that simple. Like I said, we don't use GMOs, persistent synthetic toxins. We don't have a need for these agrochemicals. We sell direct to consumers here that wish to support us. Other farms in the state do the same. So find a farm or multiple farms and local farms and support them. Farmers need to be feeding their communities throughout the world, not feeding the world like big ag purports to do, which they don't. So, I could say a lot more about the farming system that I've learned about in the last 14 years, but I'll save that to the Q&A, I guess, maybe. Also, the other thing we can do is, if you can, grow something for yourselves. Have a garden, share it with your neighbors, keep some bees, do something. Victory gardens in the World War II era, we fed a good amount of our nation just from, victory gardens. So there are solutions, Anyway, I got a couple more paragraphs to read, and then that's it. So price and value are two different things. Value is what you receive, price is what you pay. Putting nature on the balance sheet per se is not the goal of true cost accounting. Rather, the goal is to bring an economic argument into conservation policy. When nature gives us valuable services, chances are that no one is paying for those services. They are the gifts of nature, and the gifts of nature are largely public goods. Public goods have nothing to do with markets. They have a value, but not a price. The solution to the problems of public goods, the tragedy of the commons, is simply to make better policies that manage public goods. Get policies right. There are agricultural externalities that are easy to monetize, like the cost of a salmonella outbreak. But what is the price of an animal suffering? Can we even put a price on it? The true value of nature and society simply cannot be fully translated into economic value. Economists ask how much money people will be willing to pay for a given ecosystem service like a public park. But is the true value of nature determined by what humans are willing to pay for it? For example, it makes no more sense to ask how many dollars a loving relationship is worth than to ask how much love a dollar is worth. Many of the most important things in life are simply priceless. It is time for a fundamental change in political strategy if the health and integrity of the food system is to be secured. We have a cultural preoccupation with economic value. Everything of use to humans, including everything of economic value, ultimately comes through the earth. The bottom line is that the language must change regarding public policy in order to address people, not things. We need to create a new social movement that gives ethical and social values priority over economic values. Priority must be given to those things upon which the integrity of society and the future